It was the third Tuesday in September when Ryan Mitchell walked into the break room at Carta Logistics in Kansas City, Missouri, and found his 8-year-old son Mason sitting on the counter eating a cold Pop-Tart because the school had called to say Ryan forgot to pack a lunch again. And Kayla Brooks, the 39-year-old divorced CEO who usually terrified the entire third floor, was crouched down tying Mason's shoe while asking him in the gentlest voice Ryan had ever heard whether he liked dinosaurs or space more. And Ryan froze in the doorway because nobody at work knew he was a single dad. Nobody knew his wife Lauren had died in a car accident on I-70 2 years earlier when Mason was 6. Nobody knew he had been hiding the truth because he was terrified that looking weak would cost him the only steady job he had. But now Mason was here in his Spider-Man backpack, telling Kayla that his dad cried sometimes when he thought Mason was asleep, and Ryan felt the floor drop out from under him. He started apologizing, stammering that he would take Mason home right away. But Kayla stood up slowly, her dark auburn hair pulled into its usual severe bun, green eyes sharp yet strangely soft, and said, "Mitchell, my office, now." And Ryan's heart sank because he was sure he was about to be fired. He told Mason to wait with the receptionist, walked the long hallway to the corner office overlooking the Missouri River, and when the door closed, Kayla didn't sit behind her desk. She leaned against it instead and said quietly, "Why didn't you tell me you were doing this alone?" And Ryan couldn't look at her. He just stared at the carpet and muttered that he didn't want pity, didn't want special treatment. And Kayla's voice cracked just a little when she answered, "This isn't pity. This is me being furious that you've been drowning and nobody noticed." And Ryan finally looked up and saw that the Ice Queen CEO everyone whispered about had tears in her eyes. And that was the first time he realized Kayla Brooks might be human after all. The next morning, Ryan arrived at work to find a brand new insulated lunchbox on his desk with Mason's name embroidered on it, and a note in Kayla's handwriting that simply said, "He likes ham and cheese with the crusts cut off. I checked with him." And when Ryan tried to thank her in the hallway, she brushed him off with a curt, "Don't make it weird, Mitchell." But every day after that, the lunchbox appeared filled with things Mason loved, sometimes with little notes like, "Tell your dad the dinosaur nuggets are shaped like T-Rexes because he's tough." And Ryan didn't know what to do with the warmth spreading in his chest because Kayla Brooks was still the same woman who could make grown men cry in meetings. But now she was also the woman who knew his son was scared of thunderstorms and started leaving Mason's favorite blanket in the back seat of Ryan's truck on rainy days. And by November, the entire office noticed that Kayla was different around Ryan. She stopped snapping at him during presentations, started asking his opinion first, started lingering by his cubicle with excuses that got thinner every week. And one Friday, when Mason had strep throat and Ryan had to leave early, Kayla showed up at his little rental house in Raytown with a bag of groceries and a thermometer, barged right past him into the kitchen, and started making chicken soup while Mason slept on the couch. And when Ryan protested, she turned around with a wooden spoon in her hand and said, "I lost my daughter to leukemia when she was 5, Mitchell. I never got to do this for her, so let me do it for your boy." And Ryan felt the air leave his lungs because nobody knew Kayla had ever been a mother. Nobody knew she carried that kind of pain. And that night, while Mason finally ate a few spoonfuls of soup, Kayla sat on the floor coloring with him, and Ryan watched from the doorway, realizing he was falling for the one woman he absolutely should not want, the woman who signed his paychecks and could ruin his life with one email. But the heart is stupid, and his had already decided. And by Christmas, Kayla was spending every weekend at their house under the pretense of checking on Mason, bringing presents neither Ryan nor his son had ever dared ask for, teaching Mason how to ice skate on the pond behind the house, even though Ryan kept warning her the ice might not hold. And when Kayla fell through on New Year's Eve and Ryan dove in after her, pulling her freezing body to the surface while Mason screamed from the shore, something shifted forever. They ended up in the emergency room together, wrapped in blankets, sharing one of those heated ones because there weren't enough. And Kayla looked at Ryan with chattering teeth and said, "I think I'm in love with you, and it terrifies me." And Ryan kissed her right there in front of the vending machines because some moments are bigger than company policy. And that was how the single dad and the Ice Queen CEO started the most impossible relationship in Kansas City. Keeping it secret at first, sneaking kisses in the supply closet, Kayla showing up at Mason's school plays in sunglasses and a baseball cap, Ryan bringing her coffee exactly the way she liked it every morning without being asked. But secrets have a way of cracking open, and by spring the entire office knew. Whispers followed them everywhere.
Kayla's ex-husband, David, who still sat on the board, started making noises about nepotism and conflict of interest. And one terrible Thursday in May, Kayla called Ryan into her office and told him with shaking hands that the board was forcing her to choose him or the company her daughter's medical bills had almost bankrupted her into building. And Ryan told her without hesitation, choose the company. We'll figure the rest out, because he'd rather lose her than watch her lose everything she had fought for. And Kayla cried harder than he had ever seen her cry and said, "I can't lose you too." But Ryan kissed her forehead and walked out before he could change his mind. And for 6 weeks they were strangers again. Kayla cold and distant, Ryan barely sleeping, Mason asking why Miss Kayla didn't come over anymore, until the night Mason had a severe asthma attack, and Ryan rushed him to Children's Mercy, and the only person he could think of was Kayla, and she was there in 15 minutes, still in her pajamas under a trench coat, holding Mason's hand while they pumped albuterol into his lungs. And when the doctor said he would be okay, Kayla looked at Ryan across the hospital bed and whispered, "I quit this morning. I choose you. I choose both of you." And Ryan pulled her into his arms right there in room 312 and promised her they would be okay, that love was worth more than any corner office. And that was only the beginning, because letting go of power is never clean. David fought dirty, lawsuits and rumors and frozen accounts, but Kayla fought dirtier because now she was fighting for a family again. And by the end of summer, they were living together in Ryan's little house in Raytown, Kayla learning how to make dinosaur chicken nuggets and attending PTA meetings, Ryan learning how to love a woman who sometimes woke up screaming her dead daughter's name, and Mason calling Kayla Mom for the first time one random Tuesday while she helped him with second-grade math, and Kayla cried so hard she had to leave the room. But they were happy, truly happy, until the past came knocking in the form of a letter from a lawyer in St. Louis saying that Kayla's daughter Emily hadn't actually died, that David had taken her and faked the death certificate to punish Kayla for leaving him during the leukemia treatments. And suddenly everything they had built stood on the edge of a cliff, because Emily was alive, 11 years old, and living 2 hours away with a father who had poisoned her against the mother she thought she had abandoned her. And Kayla looked at Ryan with pure terror and said, "I have to get her back, even if she hates me, even if it breaks us." And Ryan just held her and said, "Then we get her back together, because some fights are worth everything." And that was the real story began, the one that would break them open and put them back together stronger than they ever thought possible.
The letter from the St. Louis attorney sat open on the kitchen table like a bomb that had already gone off. The words, "Emily Grace Brooks is alive and in the custody of her father, David Brooks," typed in cold black ink, while Kayla stared at it until the letters blurred, because her daughter, the little girl she had held through chemotherapy and kissed goodbye in a hospital room 11 years ago, the child she had buried in a tiny white casket, was breathing and walking and hating her 2 hours away. And Ryan watched Kayla's entire body fold in on itself the way it had the night she fell through the ice, only this time there was no freezing water to pull her from, just a different kind of drowning. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He told me," she coded. "He showed me the death certificate. He let me plan a funeral." And Ryan felt rage so pure it scared him, but he swallowed it down because Kayla needed steady hands right now. So he made the phone calls, hired the best family law attorney in Kansas City with the last of the savings he had been keeping for Mason's college, and within a week, they were driving east on I-70 in silence, while Mason slept in the back seat clutching the stuffed triceratops Kayla had bought him the first week she started coming over. And when they reached the modest brick house in Chesterfield, the door opened before they even knocked, and there stood Emily, tall for 11 with Kayla's exact green eyes and auburn hair but cut short, staring at them like they were ghosts, and behind her stood David, looking thinner and grayer than Kayla remembered, smiling the same cruel smile he had worn the day he told her their daughter was gone. And the first words out of Emily's mouth were, "You're not my mom left me." And Kayla dropped to her knees on the porch concrete, sobbing, "I never left you, baby, I never left you," while Emily backed away into David's arms, and Ryan felt every protective instinct in his body ignite. But he stayed calm because this wasn't about him. This was about a little girl who had been lied to for 6 years. And the next months became a nightmare of court dates and supervised visits and therapy sessions where Emily sat with her arms crossed, refusing to speak while Kayla cried quietly in the corner. And Ryan drove them every Saturday, 4 hours round trip, never complaining even when Mason started asking why Emily didn't like them. And slowly, painfully slowly, Emily began to thaw. First by accepting the dinosaur stickers Kayla brought every visit, then by asking quiet questions about the little brother she had never met. Then one Saturday in late October, when the leaves were blood red, she let Kayla hug her for 3 full seconds before pulling away. And Kayla came out to the parking lot and cried into Ryan's chest so hard he thought she might break in half. But it was progress, it was hope. And by Christmas, the judge granted joint custody, with Kayla getting every other weekend and holidays. And Emily spent her first night in Raytown standing in the doorway of Mason's room, watching him sleep, because she had never had a sibling and didn't know what to do with the feeling in her chest. And Kayla slept on the floor outside their door just in case either child needed her, and Ryan found her there at dawn with tears on her cheeks and a smile he hadn't seen since before the letter came. And for a while, things felt almost manageable. Emily started calling Kayla Mom in careful lowercase letters. Mason taught her how to ride a bike. Ryan coached both kids' soccer team even though Emily pretended she hated sports. And Kayla sold her remaining shares in Carter Logistics to pay the legal bills and started consulting from home so she could be there when the school bus dropped them off. And they were stitching together a family from the torn pieces when the next bomb hit. Kayla's routine blood work came back abnormal, and the oncologist in Kansas City used the word leukemia, and everything stopped. Because the universe apparently had a sense of humor so cruel it could only be real. And Kayla looked at Ryan across the doctor's desk and laughed the hollow laugh of someone who had already buried one child and said, of course it's this." And Ryan held her hand so tight his knuckles went white, while Mason and Emily waited in the lobby coloring pictures they didn't know would never be hung on a refrigerator if things went wrong. And the treatment plan was aggressive: induction chemotherapy, possible bone marrow transplant, months in the hospital. And Kayla made Ryan promise that if she didn't make it, he would fight for full custody of both kids, because Emily still had one parent who had never abandoned her, and Mason deserved a sister. And Ryan told her to shut up because she was not allowed to die, not after everything. And the first round of chemo hit Kayla like a freight train, hair gone in clumps, weight falling off, but she still insisted on video calls with the kids every night from her hospital bed, reading them chapters of Harry Potter even when her voice gave out. And Emily started sneaking into Mason's bed at night crying because she was terrified of losing another mom. And Ryan lay awake listening to 2 children breathe and wondering how much one man could take before he broke. And then the miracle came in the form of a 9-year-old boy who looked exactly like Mason. Because when they tested Emily for the transplant registry, they discovered she was a perfect half match, but the doctors needed a second donor for umbilical cord blood, and somehow, impossibly, Mason's sample from his newborn screening 11 years earlier had been preserved and was a perfect match too. And Kayla cried when they told her because her children, both of them, were going to save her life. And the transplant happened in March while Kansas City was still cold, Emily holding Kayla's hand on one side, Mason on the other, Ryan standing behind them with tears he refused to let fall until the new cells were in. And the weeks of isolation were brutal. Kayla behind glass, the kids pressing their palms to it every day, drawing hearts with dry erase markers, and Ryan bringing them homemade cards and recording himself reading bedtime stories so Kayla could fall asleep to his voice. And one night when Kayla's counts were finally rising, she looked at Ryan through the window and mouthed, "Marry me." And Ryan laughed so hard the nurse shushed him, but he nodded yes, because of course he would marry her. He had been hers since the day she tied his son's shoe in the break room. And on the day Kayla finally walked out of the transplant unit, weak but alive, Emily ran into her arms screaming "Mom" in uppercase for the first time, and Mason tackled them both, and Ryan stood back watching the 3 people he loved most in the world hold each other like they would never let go again. And that was when he knew they had won. Not just the cancer, but every ugly thing the world had thrown at them, because love had stitched them together stronger than blood ever could.
The morning Kayla Brooks walked out of the transplant ward at Children's Mercy Hospital for the last time, the April sun was so bright it felt like the world had been washed clean. She was 30 pounds lighter, her head wrapped in a soft purple scarf Emily had picked out because it was the color of courage. And when the automatic doors slid open, both kids sprinted across the lobby and crashed into her so hard the nurse had to steady them all. Mason's face buried in her stomach, Emily's arms locked around her neck, and Ryan stood 5 feet away, holding a bouquet of grocery store tulips because they were the first flowers he could grab, tears running freely down his cheeks because he had promised himself he would not cry in front of her again. But promises are useless against miracles. And Kayla looked over the kid's head straight at him and mouthed, "Come here." And when he reached them, she pulled him into the tango and whispered, "We made it," like she still couldn't believe it was real. And the drive home to Raytown was loud, with Mason telling every detail of the Fortnite season he had played while she was gone, and Emily reading aloud the get-well cards her entire fifth-grade class had made. And Ryan kept one hand on the wheel and the other wrapped around Kayla's thin fingers because he needed to feel her pulse to know this wasn't a dream. And when they pulled into the driveway, the little rental house had been transformed. Their neighbors had strung fairy lights across the porch and hung a hand-painted banner that read, "Welcome home, Mom," in purple and green glitter. And inside, every surface was covered with balloons and homemade signs, and a chocolate sheet cake that said, "Cancer lost, love won," and lopsided icing. And Kayla stood in the doorway and cried the kind of tears that come after you've used up all the sad ones and only happy ones
are left. And that night after the kids finally passed out on the couch mid-movie, Ryan carried Kayla to their bed, laid her down like she was made of glass, and asked again the question he had asked to Hospital Glass. "Will you marry me? For real this time? No more waiting." And Kayla laughed through fresh tears and said yes, but only if we do it tomorrow because I'm done wasting days. And the next morning, April 23rd, they woke the kids at dawn, drove to the Jackson County Courthouse in Ryan's beat-up Silverado with Mason still in dinosaur pajamas and Emily wearing the purple scarf as a cape. And in courtroom 3B, with a sleepy judge and two strangers as witnesses, Ryan Mitchell and Kayla Brooks became husband and wife, while Mason held the rings in a plastic dinosaur egg, and Emily filmed the whole thing on Kayla's phone. And when the judge said, "You may kiss the bride," Ryan kissed her so gently she started crying again, and Mason yelled, "Bros," and Emily yelled, "Do it again," and they all laughed until their sides hurt. And that should have been the ending, the perfect bow on the hardest years of their lives. But David Brooks had never been good at letting go, and 3 weeks later, on a Thursday that started ordinary, he filed an emergency motion for full custody of Emily, claiming Kayla's cancer made her an unfit parent, and that Ryan was an unrelated male with no legal standing. And the notice arrived while Kayla was helping Emily with fractions at the kitchen table, and when she read it, her hand started shaking so badly she dropped the paper, and Emily saw the word "unfit" and ran to her room screaming that her mom was going to die and leave her again. And Ryan found Kayla on the floor, picking up the pieces of paper, like if she could just put them back together, the words would disappear. And that night, he held her while she cried herself empty and promised they would fight this too. And they did, selling the new car Kayla had bought after the transplant, draining the last to the college funds, hiring a guardian ad litem who spent weeks interviewing teachers and therapists and neighbors. And every Saturday, David paraded Emily into court looking perfect in dresses she hated, while he painted Kayla as a reckless career woman who had abandoned her child once and would do it again. And Emily started having nightmares again, waking up screaming for a mom who wasn't there. And one night in July, when the judge granted David temporary primary custody pending final hearing, Kayla stood in the hallway outside the courtroom and vomited into a trash can while Ryan held her hair, and Emily watched from 10 feet away with tears running down her face, unsure which parent to go to. And Ryan made the hardest decision of his life that night. He sat Kayla down after the kids were asleep and told her he would step back, move out if he had to, remove himself as an issue so David couldn't use him as a weapon. And Kayla begged him not to leave, but Ryan kissed her forehead and said, "I'm not leaving you, I'm saving our daughter." And for 6 weeks, he lived in a studio apartment above his buddy's garage, seeing the kids only as supervised visits, while Kayla's hair started falling out again from stress, and the cancer stayed in remission, but her heart looked like it might not. And Emily stopped speaking to anyone, Mason started wetting the bed again, and Ryan lost 20 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. But the Guardian's final report came back glowing about Kayla's parenting and questioning David's motives. And on the day of the final hearing in September, the judge looked David in the eye and said, "You have manipulated this child for the last time," and awarded Kayla full custody with supervised visitation for David only. And when the gavel fell, Kayla turned and ran straight into Ryan's arms in the back of the courtroom and whispered, "Come home." And Ryan cried into her scarf like a man who had been holding his breath for months. And 2 days later, they moved into a bigger house in Blue Springs with enough bedrooms for everyone and a backyard big enough for a treehouse Ryan promised to build before winter. And Emily asked if she could take Ryan's last name too because Mitchell sounds like family. And Kayla cried again, but happy tears this time. And on a Saturday in October, they renewed their vows properly in the backyard with Mason as best man and Emily as maid of honor, Kayla wearing the simple white sundress and the purple scarf like a crown, Ryan in the same suit he wore to the courthouse. And when the minister said, "You may kiss the bride again," Ryan kissed her like the first time, and Mason yelled, "Still gross," and Emily yelled, "Finally," and they all laughed until they couldn't breathe. And life settled into the kind of ordinary that feels like a miracle.
Kayla consulting part-time, Ryan back at Carter Logistics in a better position because the new CEO had heard what he sacrificed and believed in second chances. Mason and Emily fighting over the bathroom like actual siblings. Friday pizza nights and Saturday soccer games and Sunday pancakes that Kayla still burned half the time. And when Mason turned 12 and Emily turned 15, they surprised Kayla with a trip to Disney World using every dime they had saved from chores and birthdays because they wanted their mom to see the castle she had only ever seen in pictures with Emily when she was too sick for chemo. And on the last night in Magic Kingdom, the fireworks exploded over Cinderella's castle, and Kayla stood in between your children with Ryan's arms around them all and cried because she never thought she would get this many tomorrows. And years later, when Mason brought home his first serious girlfriend and Emily left from Mizzou on a full scholarship and Ryan's hair went completely gray and Kayla stayed silver and beautiful, they still went back to that same backyard every April 23rd and renewed their vows again with whatever kids and grandkids showed up. Mason reading the same best man speech he had written at 10 about how love is when someone shows up with a lunchbox even when they don't have to. And Emily adding new lines every year about how family is the people who choose you even when it's hard. And when Ryan turned 65 and Kayla 68, they sat on the porch swing they had bought with their first tax refund as a married couple and watched fireflies while the grandkids chased each other through the yard. And Kayla leaned her head on Ryan's shoulder and said, "I used to think the worst thing that could happen was losing everything, but the best thing was finding you in the pieces." And Ryan kissed the top of her silver hair and answered, "You saved me first. Remember the lunchbox?" And they laughed quietly the way old couples do when they have too many memories to speak them all. And on a quiet Tuesday in May, when the tulips were blooming, Kayla woke up and told Ryan she felt tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. And he knew before the doctor confirmed it that the leukemia had come back, aggressive this time. No more miracles left. And they called the kids home and told them together on the same porch swing. And Emily, who was 25 and engaged, held her mom and said, "You fought enough." And Mason, who was 23 and about to become a teacher, cried into her lap like he was 8 again. And Kayla spent her last weeks exactly where she wanted, in her own bed with the windows open so she could hear the kids laughing in the yard, Ryan never leaving her side, reading her the Harry Potter books one more time because some stories are worth repeating. And on the morning she slipped away, the sun was rising golden through the curtains, and Mason was holding one hand and Emily the other, and Ryan was holding her face telling her, "Thank you for every lunchbox. Thank you for every tomorrow." And Kayla smiled the same smile she had worn the day she came home from the hospital and whispered, "Tell them the story. Tell them how love wins." And then she was gone. And they buried her under the big oak in the backyard because she wanted to stay close. And every April 23rd, Ryan and the kids and eventually the grandkids gathered around that tree and told the story again. How a scary CEO once tied a little boy's shoe in a break room and ended up saving 3 lives with nothing but fierce, stubborn love. And when Ryan finally joined her 30 years later in '93, he was buried right beside her with a simple stone that read, "Ryan Mitchell, he always came home." And underneath, in Kayla's handwriting carved deep, "Together again, no more lunch boxes needed." And on quiet summer nights when the fireflies come out, people swear they can see 2 figures on the old porch swing. A silver-haired woman laughing at something a gray-haired man whispered, their hands intertwined the way they were the day she first said yes. Proof that some love stories don't end with death. They just move to the backyard where the tulips bloom every spring, and the kids keep telling the story exactly the way she asked.